Welcome to the Westport Library. I'm Marta Campbell. I'm happy to see you all here today. We're always wondering about the weather in January, and so far we've lucked out. And this weekend was sort of close, but we lucked out again, so that's a good thing. Before we get started, I remind you to turn off your cell phones or whatever might make noise. There are a few Westport Reads programs remaining. We will be showing both the National Geographic documentary, Where's Amelia Earhart, and the Hollywood version, Amelia, with Hilary Swank and Richard Gere, one more time. The documentary tomorrow at 2 p.m. in this room, and Amelia on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. in this room. This week on Tuesday evening at 7:30, our library mystery maven, Jane Murphy, will lead a discussion of the Max Collins book, Flying Blind, a novel of Amelia Earhart, and everyone is welcome. There are copies of the book available at the circulation desk. At that gathering, which is in the seminar room upstairs, the drawing will take place to find the winner of a 15-minute flight in a 1929 New Standard biplane at the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome in Rhinebeck, New York. For a chance to be a winner, you may fill out a form at each Westport Reads event before Tuesday, and you do not have to be present to win at the drawing. And there's a box on the back table, and I've already seen some of you putting in your information there, so feel free. One entry at each event you attend. If you want a respite from this cold and snowy weather, come to the Tropical Island Party on Friday, January 27th. The Great Hall upstairs will be transformed into a sunny paradise. Join the celebration and enjoy the food, drinks, music, and fun. And you may make your reservation for this online at www.westportlibrary.org. Well, we've devoted most of the month to the American icon, Amelia Earhart. Today, I expect we will learn something new about Amelia. We are fortunate to have Dr. Gerry Kuroghlian here to fill in the facts behind a familiar story. I had heard about Dr. K for many years, but became acquainted with him only recently. When I asked him to participate in Westport Reads again this year, I really had no idea of the commitment he would make. Those who had known him for years were not surprised. Voted Teacher of the Year by his peers, honored as hometown hero on Cablevision, Gerry retired after 40-some years at Staples and now tutors at the Mercy Learning Center and the Colby Cathedral High School in Bridgeport. Gerry's gift for relating to his students continues to make a difference in the world. We welcome him today and look forward to hearing about Amelia Earhart, the lady behind the legend. A podcast of his talk will be posted on the library website in a couple of weeks. Please join me in welcoming Gerry.
Thank you very much. Marta asked me to do this assignment in October of last year, and I thought, oh, that's great. I know what my question is going to be. What happened to Amelia Earhart? This is going to be a great assignment. It'll be sort of a mystery. And then I started to read about Amelia Earhart. And I read, and I read, and I read. I have 12 books at home out of the library on her. And the question changed for me. And I think the question changed because of my background. We all come to biography with a lens. The last speaker came to Amelia Earhart with a feminist lens and did a presentation on looking at Amelia as a feminist. Well, my background is obviously as an educator. Having taught for as long as I've taught, I always wonder what will happen to my students when they leave me, and what will they become? Well, this was a great exercise in working backwards. We know what Amelia Earhart became, but we don't know how she became the way she is. She lived 40 years, born in 1897, disappeared in 1937, and we concentrate on the last 10 years of her fame. But I think the much more interesting period for her is to look at the 3 decades prior to her emergence on the American scene. And I'm going to steal with with no problems whatsoever, because that's what teachers do. We take from all kinds of places and we put things together. And the controlling idea from this actually came from a meeting of the Westport Rotary last Friday. A fabulous quote by Kahlil Gibran, and it's perfect for this audience since I know so many of you and I know your children. Gibran said, in talking about parents and grandparents, "You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth." You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are set forth. And I think that's a wonderful place for us to start with Amelia Earhart. Very, very, very interesting woman prior to her emergence as a pilot and in the air. And I'd like to start with her family. We all come from families. In Westport, I believe families are the key to success of the students that I taught. And I know that they're successful because you're old enough for me to have seen them grow up and flourish. So, very first place we're going to look at are her parents. I'm sorry, this is not the best photograph. This was taken in 1895 and it didn't blow up very well. But let's talk about both sides of her family. We'll start with her mom, Amy Otis. Amy Otis is one of 6 children of Alfred and Amelia Otis. He came to Kansas in 1855 as an attorney and then as a judge, and his primary purpose was to prevent the spread of slavery. He was extremely active in the abolitionist movement and was a prime mover on the Underground Railroad. Her mother, Amy Harris, came from a noted Lutheran theological family. Her father spent a lot of time in seminary and writing on various Lutheran issues. They had 6 children. Amy is the second in the family, and Judge Otis became a part of the Kansas legislature. He amassed a great deal of property, and at his death was worth approximately $4.5 million in modern money. Okay, he left in the state of $200,000, but $4.5 million if we put it into 2012 dollars. The father's family, certainly not so illustrious. This is Edwin Stanton Earhart. He is the son of a Lutheran minister in Atchison, Kansas. A poor Lutheran minister. His home, when I got a picture of it, and it was very, very, very grainy, is almost a shack. So how did these people from 2 disparate families connect to form a union? Amy's family was wealthy. They read extensively. There were always books in the home. There was always music in the home. The family spent the evenings reading to each other. The father had enough money so that they traveled extensively through the West. The idea of the father's idea was that new experiences make you grow as a person, and he certainly practiced what he preached. All of the children went to the best college preparatory school in Atkinson, called the College Preparatory School. What a great original name. And Amy was going to go to Vassar. However, she caught diphtheria and was not able to follow through with her plans. And instead of going to college, she decided, or her parents decided, that she was going to have a coming out party because they certainly were among the top echelon of Atchison, Kansas society. And it was at this party that Edwin was invited. His father was a Lutheran minister. The grandfather had been very, very prominent in the Lutheran church. so that invitation was extended to him. He came and Amy was smitten. He was apparently a fabulous dancer. I don't think he's that great looking, but she did, and that's all that counts. He was tall, able on his feet, and certainly a chord was struck. Was Judge Otis happy about this? No, not in the least. He had better plans for his daughter than marrying a poor minister's son who was working his way through the University of Kansas. As a matter of fact, put the kibosh on his multiple attempts to become engaged. Father thought he was a gold digger. That may or may not be true. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But Judge Otis told Edwin that before he could marry his daughter, he had to earn at least $50 a month. Well, it took him 5 years after he graduated from the University of Kansas in order to do that. They were married. Judge Otis gave a great wedding present. I mean, I didn't get this from my father-in-law. I should have asked, I suppose. Judge Otis bought the family a home in Kansas City, Kansas. He furnished the home completely. It's a great way to start as a married couple. The problem was Amy had been brought up in an upper-class home, was used to a cook, was used to maids, was used to servants, was used to spending money. I mean, she's the daughter of a millionaire. Things changed rapidly when she got married. She had to do her own cooking, she had to do her own cleaning. Stanton's career as a railroad lawyer was just getting off its feet, and unfortunately, it was a rocky start. She became pregnant in the first year that they were married on a trolley ride. The trolley lurched, she fell, and she lost the baby. And this was extremely traumatic for her, extremely traumatic. She wanted her mother, we can certainly understand that. She wanted to be home, she wanted to be in a safe environment. When she became pregnant again, which would turn out to be Amelia, she asked her husband if she could go back to Atkinson and have the baby at home, which her husband granted. And therefore, Amelia was born on July 24th in 1897 in the bosom of her mom's home and with the love of her one aunt and 4 uncles, and proceeded to spend the next basically 10 years in this environment. A wonderful life. Usually, most of us get to see our grandparents. I saw my grandmother every Sunday. It was the highlight of my week. I think we all know about grandparent love. If you've received it and you're giving it, it's a different kind of love, parental love. It's supportive, it's encouraging, it's all-encompassing, it's marvelous. And for 10 months out of the year, she spent the year with her parents, with her grandparents. Her grandparents gave her the same schooling her mother had given her. She went to college prep, and 2 years later, when her sister was born, the same deal went on. Let's move to Graham and Grampy's. This is a wonderful place to live. The books are still there, the education is there, the money is there, and the best part is the freedom to be who I want to be is there. Amy kept a notebook on her daughter's development. I think for the first kid, you always have a notebook with pictures. By the time you get down the line, there are no pictures and no notebook. But we have the notebook on child 1. And Mom kept copious notes on her development. Amelia put herself, she's named, by the way, for her 2 grandmothers. It's her middle name is Mary, after her paternal grandmother, and Amelia after her maternal grandmother. She put herself to bed at 2 years of age. She would just say, "It's time for me to go to bed," And away she trotted. She learned to read when she was 3.5. Big whoop, with all those books around and all these aunts and uncles reading to you. No great progress, but she loved books. And she was used to them. If she wanted a child's book, Grandpa bought it. Grandma read it to her. Fabulous, fabulous life. And here's the best part. If you can imagine dressing in the turn of the century, little girls wore floor-length skirts, lots of undergarments that were incredibly restrictive, and there was a sharp delineation between what boys did and what girls did. The greatest part, I think, of this century is that, when I first started, I remember at Staples, girls basketball, which was the most ridiculous sport I had ever seen. Girls could only bounce the ball twice, and then they had to pass it. And I thought, what? But these things merge in the 1960s and the 1970s. We have equalization. And the great thing about this family is the fact this is called the home, this is their home called Quality Hill. What a great name for a wealthy family. Unfortunately, when the estate was sold, you've got other homes that have been built next to it. This had extensive property, barns. It went down the hill to the Missouri River, and these girls were brought up quite differently from the other girls of the time period. Amelia and her sisters grew up playing football. They played baseball. They certainly played cowboys and Indians. And you're thinking to yourself, well, how are they doing all this stuff in floor-length skirts? Well, they didn't. They had the first, what I call, feminist gear for Atkinson, Kansas. Mom and Grandma sewed them boys-type clothing. They wore bloomers. They wore sort of like sweatshirts together, and they were able to do everything that a boy did. Grandpa encouraged them. Grandmother called them absolutely uncivilized little beasts, and she was worried they would grow up to be someone that no one would marry, but that didn't stop Gran from encouraging them, and certainly when Edwin had them at his home, he encouraged them. Edwin played the Indian chief, and the girls were Indians, and they reversed it. It wasn't the cowboys killing the Indians, it was the Indians killing the cowboys, out of the box. Out of the box and different. And these girls were encouraged to be as physical as they were mental. It's a sound mind and a sound body, and they were brought up that way. One of the things that happened was that Grandpa took them to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 when Amelia was 7 years of age. She was not allowed to go on the roller coaster. It was too dangerous. So when she got home, she talked one of her mother's brothers into building a roller coaster. And it consisted of a series of 2x4s that went off the back of Grandma's house down the hill. It was liberally greased with lard. And Amelia took a box and got up on the back. You can see that the house slopes down. Got on it, went whipping down this thing, crashed, and said, "I love it. It feels like flying." And that's the first quotation that we have from her that has any reference whatsoever to flight. Now, this lasted for approximately 10 years. It was a very, very idyllic life. Encouragement in everything that she could possibly have done. But all good things come to an end, and in 1908, we begin the second phase of her life. If the first 10 years of her life were heaven, the second 10 years of her life I call Dante's descent into hell, unfortunately. Her father began working as a railroad attorney in Des Moines, Iowa. He had a very good job. between 1908 and 1912, they went through a series of homes, each one getting better and better and better. They traveled extensively. He had a Pullman coach available to the family as part of his job. So the mom and the girls and dad traveled all over the country on the railroad. They went to excellent schools. They went to multiple events. However, Dad started to drink in approximately 1910. And the drinking became excessive. Now you're going to ask, why? I have my own theories on this. I think one of the things that happened, and this had happened earlier in their marriage, without the direct support of Grandma and Grandpa, the money sort of dwindled. The expenses went up. Grandma and Grandpa had taken care of the girls for 10 months out of the year, and Dad had to start paying for things much more extensively. He also, his job didn't seem to be going very well, and instead of buckling down to the job, he buckled down to the bottle. Got to the point where he started to embarrass the girls, and I'll give you one incident. The girls were both in high school at this time period. There was a father and daughter dance. He was scheduled to take the girls to a dance after work, and when he got off the trolley, she was with a number of girls who were dressed, ready to go dancing, and Dad stumbled off the trolley. It was clear there was something wrong, and by the time he got into the house and Amelia was able to get close to him, the smell of liquor was all pervasive, and she just said, "Dad, I don't think that this is a night for us to go out." Great disappointment. Quickly, he went downhill. He lost his job, and was forced to move to St. Paul, Minnesota, with a big drop in pay. One thing I forgot to insert, for the first time, Amelia saw a plane in 1911 when she went to the Iowa State Fair. There was a pilot flying. There's no record of her response to that, but she came home and wrote in her diary, which she kept. She also kept a scrapbook. "I saw a man flying." End of note. The next move to St. Paul was a really discouraging move. Her uncle, one of her mom's brothers, who was quite wealthy, lived in the city, did a preliminary call on the family, was disappointed to see Edwin's drinking, and basically cut them off. The salary was so low that they rented a home in a very bad part of town that killed Amelia and her sister's social life. Other girls of her milieu, did not travel across town to visit her. She did extremely well in school, but she buried herself in her schoolwork. Kids didn't come to her home. Moms did not allow their girls to visit their home. Things got pretty sad. Things got more sad economically. And this is a story that predates Gone with the Wind, but I found this absolutely fascinating. There was no social life at school, but there was social life at the Lutheran church. Both girls were very involved in their youth group at the church. And there was another dance to which they were invited. There was no appropriate clothing for the girls to wear at the dance. And I just love this. The girls went up into the attic of the home, and Mom had saved white silk curtains from their home in Des Moines. And just like Gone with the Wind, the girls brought the fabric down. They had been taught to sew by their grandmother. They cut patterns out. They dyed the white silk. And made dresses, and then prayed that it would not rain on the night of the dance so that the dresses would not run, and had a very successful evening. And I think that's one of the things that marks Amelia as a personality. Obviously, her grandparents addressed her quite well. If we look at the pictures, this is grandmother on the left, grandpa on the back, her Aunt Annie behind her, her mother's sister. Aunt Annie's child is in grandma's lap, and then Amelia is sitting on grandpa's lap, and Muriel is in the middle. 7, she's still at her grandparents', and dressed like a proper little girl, I think, for portrait pictures. And again, in 1910, just before they moved, she looks like any other girl of the time period in terms of what she's wearing. Mom, at this point, had said to herself, this isn't working. This is simply not working. The family is spiraling downhill. The house is cold. We can't make payments on the coal deliveries. The coal man stopped delivering to the home because he wasn't paid. So she had obviously been brought up in one world and found herself in another, and it got to the point where she finally said, something's got to give. Talked to her husband. He said that he had been offered a job in Springfield, Missouri, and they moved again. And this was the breaking point. When they got to Springfield, they found that there was no job available. There was no job. And she simply could not deal with this anymore. Amy telegraphed a friend in Chicago, a school friend, not a relative, and said, I'm at my wit's end. I need a place to live. I'm separating from my husband for the present. Can you please help me? And her school friend said, yes, I will. And they moved to a home in Hyde Park, Illinois. Okay? A lovely part of the city, always has been, always I hope will be. And this is where I think you start to see Amelia flexing some muscle on her own. She had weathered the downward spiral, I think, quite well. She threw herself into her schoolwork. She did very, very well in school. She used the public library extensively. We can see that from what we have left over. If she didn't have the money to buy books, she went to the library and continued to read voraciously. She filled her time. She didn't have a social life, she had a reading life. When she got to Chicago, she said to herself, and she told her mother, she did not want to go to the high school that the family, in the area that the family was living in. She wanted to go to the best high school. This is in Des Moines, and this is at the best home that they were in before his fall. In a very fashionable street in Des Moines. I could not find a picture of the Pitt House in St. Paul, but the description is it's not a place you would want to live. And in 1914, she chose Hyde Park High School. Again, thank you for Libraries Online. In her yearbook, the phrase over her yearbook picture when she graduated in 1915 is, "The girl in brown who walks alone." How sad. But the girl in brown who walks alone had a fabulous career in sports and in her academics. She graduated close to the top of her class, had applied, was going to apply to Vassar and Smith, and for whatever reason, and I was not able to find this out, never sent in the application, might not have had the application fee. Grandma and Grandpa had died at this point, leaving, as I told you, $4.3 million. However, Grandpa stepped in again and said, Amy can't get the money for 15 years. Her husband will go through all of it. He'll just, like a knife through butter, he'll just flip it away, so we can't do that. However, the girls are getting to the point where money is needed. The brother who was in charge of the estate died in 1915, and when the records were examined, we found that he had invested the money poorly, that her share of the money had dropped by $25,000, and therefore Mom went after breaking the will. And in 1915, the will was broken. Thank goodness the will was broken, because it allowed Mom to do something about the education of her daughters. And I think this enters the third stage of Amelia's life in 1916. The part that I like the best, it's the role of a school in shaping someone's life. And she went to a private, what I would call a finishing school. Some authors called it a college. In researching it, I didn't get a college idea. I think it's more like a 2-year girls' finishing school. It was the Augant School, which she entered in 1916. I found lots of similarities between this school and the one that Eleanor Roosevelt attended in her childhood, in that Amy Sutherland, who ran the school, was an absolutely amazing woman. Amy had gone to school with Gertrude Stein and Helen Keller, who were in her close circle of friends, and she was a woman who believed that women can do anything. And it was under her tutelage that we really see Amelia, I think, coming into her own. While she was at Augant's, she played hockey. She was proficient in French and German. She alienated some of her classmates. While she was very popular, she took on an unpopular assignment there. She felt that the girls' sororities at Augant's were exclusive and did not include everyone as they should have. She believed that all clubs in a college should accept everyone. And she fought strenuously to rid the campus of sororities. Well, obviously in a girls' school, this was not the most popular thing to go on, because obviously at this time period, the way you met boys was that sororities had dances with fraternities, and if we got rid of sororities, how could we meet anyone? And she became an outcast. Didn't stop her very long, because the next year she was voted as the vice president of her class. So obviously she's got a lot going on here. My other little stolen point, and this comes from Weight Watchers, is that attitude, the numerical, if we put assignments A being 1, etc., attitude adds up to being 100%. And I am convinced that Amelia's attitude while at this school made her who she turned out to be. She threw herself into activities. She spent a lot of time with Miss Sutherland, and as an English teacher, I love this story. In her second year there, she had a rather elderly English teacher. She was in her 70s, and not much was going on in the class. As I said, she was an absolutely voracious reader. They weren't reading much. She went to the headmistress and said, something's got to happen here. I can't stand this class. The girls are fooling around. They're gossiping. They're sending notes to each other. They're talking about boys. This is an absolute waste of my time. And she got into real trouble with the head of the school. It's hard to knock a teacher when you're a kid. And she wasn't going to let that get in her way. So she went to the librarian of the school and said, I want to set up an alternative English class. They're supposed to read 6 books during the course of the semester. I'll read 14 if you sign off on this. Attitude. If you can't fight it, go around it. Love that move. And she did. She very, very successfully maneuvered that. And then was asked to form the school song as well as the school motto. And she came up with, honor is the foundation of courage. And I want you to remember that about courage, because we're going to see that come in again in her lifetime. Honor is the foundation of courage. Now, her sister at this time, we are now in 1960, her sister has been sent to St. Margaret's College in Toronto, Canada. The United States is about to enter World War I, and Amelia decides to visit her sister in Toronto, and it is this visit that causes another change in journey. We don't know, this picture has been labeled 3 different things in my research. It was labeled Ogden's graduation by 8 books, so I put Ogden's graduation in there, but she never graduated from Ogden's. So I'm not quite sure if this is sort of the picture you take in January before you graduate, in the hopes that you will graduate the way we usually do, and that's what I think I'm going to chalk that up to. But she visited her sister, and obviously Canada had been in the war long before the United States. They had been in the war in 1914 as part of the British Empire. And Amelia decided that having walked through Toronto and seen all of these soldiers missing limbs, horribly maimed, that school and reality were 2 very, very different things. And she volunteered and took a course in nursing and spent 6 months, actually from 1917 to 1918, fully involved in nursing. She worked with British and French pilots who talked to her extensively about their careers as pilots during the war. Again, an influence about flying that came in. She visited the airfields with other pilots. She wrote back to her mother that there were many beautiful boys in the city of Toronto, and she was going to take advantage of them. But I think she's my kind of girl. She would go out with a guy once and allow him to pay for her, but if she wasn't interested, she would never make a second date, and she wrote in her diary that there's no reason to take advantage of young men and have them pay for you if you're not interested in them. I like that. I really like that sense of independence. At any rate, very successful nursing career. The war ended, and unfortunately, the world epidemic of influenza hit Canada. She threw herself into this, nursing at this hospital, the Spadina Military Hospital. However, she herself caught influenza. We don't have the medicines that we have today to cure it. She had an infection in her sinuses as a result of getting the influenza, and the only way that it could be cured was for the doctor to operate, drill into the sinus, and drain it, and unfortunately that got highly infected, and her nursing career came to an end. At this point, her sister got a preliminary job as a school teacher in Medford, Massachusetts. And, oops, let's go back one. She went back to Medford to recuperate. I like this. Smith College had run an ad in the local paper, she was living in Northampton, for an all-girls mechanic class. If you're recuperating and you don't know what to do, take an all-girls mechanic class. And that's exactly what Amelia did. She enrolled in the course. She found that she was good at what she did. She was able to do the repair. She really into it, thought things were great. She decided that she was going to go on to school. She enrolled in Columbia University in 1919 as a pre-med student, using Grandma and Grandpa's inherited money. That's what we're going to school on. And moved to New York City. Did well in science, made some really good friends, and then did something that I thought was really interesting. We've got lots of reports of Amelia climbing on the top of buildings where she shouldn't have been and viewing the world from height. She was actually admonished. Somehow she got the key to the dome of Columbia's library and was caught on more than one occasion by security guards with her and her girlfriend on the top of this building. And when questioned, she said, "I like the view. I think the view's absolutely great." So we've got involvement with the Air Force pilots, the fascination with height. The parents were trying to repair their marriage. She left Columbia to go home during the summer, and she joined her parents in Los Angeles in 1920. Dad decided that he needed a clean start. Said to Mom, "Look, I can really make a go of this. I just need a new place. We'll start again. Things will be great. We'll get the girls home." Muriel did not buy this. Muriel, as the younger sister said, "Dad has said this on numerous occasions and has never followed through. I'm not leaving Massachusetts. Sorry, I will stay here and I will teach, but I'm not going home." I think Amelia, who was always considerate of her parents, thought if she should lend her help to this, and moved to Hollywood, Los Angeles, and took a number of different jobs. She was just sort of like, what do you do when you're an adult and you go home to your parents and you don't know what quite to do? I think some of you are experiencing that now. The kids who return don't have a real job, they're waiting, they're doing all these kinds of things. She took a number of different jobs. She worked in a photography studio, she worked as a operator in a telephone company, she drove a truck. Thank God she took that course at Smith. If you spend the money for a course at Smith and you're a truck driver, sounds very contemporary. Great degree, no job. And it was here that her life did the monumental change. Some of the young men, her parents let out 3 rooms in their house to boarders. And one of the boarders was a very handsome young guy, an engineer, and he said to her, "Gee, what are you doing tonight? Would you like to go out to an airfield and see people fly planes? I think you'd be really, really interested." And I think she said, "Fine." Went out to the airport, which was not an airport. It was a field. It was a level field. There was nothing there except planes and shacks. And was smitten, absolutely smitten. Thought, this is fabulous. This is absolutely fabulous. This is Frank Hawks. She took her first flight with Frank Hawks in 1920 at the urging of one of the male guys that she dated. And Frank said, "Sure, I'll give you a ride in the plane." Changed her life. She got down on the ground and she said, "I am going to learn to fly." And all these guys said to her, "That's nonsense. They're not lady flyers. There's a couple of them. It's dangerous. It's not something that girls do. Forget it." She said, and Frank would not help her. Frank said, "I have no problem taking you up on the air for a joyride, but I am not going to teach you how to fly." Attitude is 100%. Attitude is 100%. "I don't need you, Frank. I'm going to find Netta Snook, who is one of the few female pilots in the area." I've got to talk a little bit about the clothing because I like this. Netta's wearing, I think what most pilots of the time period are wearing. She's wearing boots, sort of jodhpurs, a leather coat, and sort of a blouse. But I want you to look at Amelia. Amelia studies pilots. She comes home, she buys a leather coat, and she distresses it. I am not going to wear a new leather coat on the airfield. She takes the coat, she oils it down, she scratches it, she sleeps in it, okay? The blouse is silk with the tie, very fashionable boots, and she's not wearing jodhpurs, she's just wearing slacks that have been taken in. And one of the things that that really distinguishes her from other female pilots of the time period is her appearance. Her hair, when she started this in 1920, was to here. Okay? Her hair was where most girls of the time period kept their hair. What she spent the next 12 months doing, and I just can picture this. I mean, did she think her mother was a fool? Every couple of days, she would snip a couple of inches off of her hair until she wound up with this do. Okay? And that went on for 12 months of this gradual snipping up to the point where she now has pilot head. Netta was great. Netta was very, very helpful, but Netta was expensive. These were not given free, so what she spent her time doing was a myriad numbers of jobs. The most lucrative was driving the truck, which she hauled stuff all over the place, made money wherever she could, asked her mom for some money. Dad had convinced Mom to take the remaining $25,000 and invest it in a mine in South America, right while this is happening. Okay? The girl said, Mom, don't do it. Don't do it. Please don't do it. Mom, who thought that maybe this would solidify the marriage, let her husband take charge of what's going on, agreed. The mine flooded. The contact person was killed. The money was gone. Wow. Gone. All of it gone. So what we have is a girl scrambling like crazy at night, on weekends, etc. Every penny goes into flying lessons. Every single cent goes into flying lessons. And then she sees the canary. Oh my goodness, she falls in love with this plane. In love with it. Now, I'll be honest with you. I think that's a pretty neat looking plane, and I might fall in love with it, except it was $2,000. And that's a lot of money for a plane. So, she works out a deal. She will be the owner of the airport's attraction to get people out to the air. She'll be the girl who flies, because this has become a big thing, flying girls, flying women pilots. And in return for being his go-to girl, because after all, she's very bright, she's very attractive, she dresses well, she can speak well, she's a great advertisement for his airfield. And they work out this nice arrangement for her to buy this plane and work it off. I like that. And she continues to take lessons. Her parents are not at all pleased with what's happening here. Not at all pleased, right? It must be the haircut. It isn't the fact that people are dying on a daily basis when they go up in planes. This airport has numerous crashes. She crashes, doesn't kill herself, but crashes. This is not something that parents want to see their kids doing. So she says to herself, okay, that's fine. I'll turn in the plane. I'm buying a car. Do you know anything about this model? No, but I'm sure that I will have no problem learning. After all, I drive a truck. What's the big difference? Managed to get her driver's license in 2 days after getting this Model T Ford, and again, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. Bert Kinner is the owner of the airport. She works out a great relationship with him. He begins to give her picture to the news media. He starts to expand her horizons, and she was pictured in the Los Angeles Examiner with her Kinner Airport, and she was quoted as saying she wanted to fly across the continent in the following year. All the news services picked this up. And she became certainly nationally known as a result of that article in the Inquirer. In 1923, she appeared in a national air rodeo at the Glendale Airport, and at that point she got her airline's pilot license, an international license. She didn't get an American license, she got a Federation Adrenal-Geek International license, and she became engaged to Sam Chapman. Remember I told you that there was a boarder in her house, a very handsome engineer? Sam Chapman just adored her. Let her do anything she wanted to do, asked her to marry him repeatedly, would continue to ask her to marry him for the next 5 or 6 years. And she said no, 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 no. I think like Queen Elizabeth I, she realized that as soon as she got married, the only place she would be flying would be in her kitchen. And just did not want to be encumbered by becoming a classical wife. And so while she certainly enjoyed his company, she wasn't going to attach herself to his star. And given everything I've read about Sam Chapman, it was probably a nice looking, but boring. Not the most adventuresome person we would ever meet. At any rate, in 1924, hello. In 1924, her parents finally called it quits. I think the loss of the money was the final blow. He started drinking. He joined Christian Scientists, which happened to have been the best thing that ever happened to him, but it was too late. He stayed sober for the rest of his life, but their marriage was at an end. She sold everything she had and bought this yellow Peril. It was a Kissel Roadster car. She packed Mom up in it and said, "We're out of here. This isn't, we've had enough. We are leaving." And the way we're going back to live with Sister in Massachusetts, but along the way we're going to visit everything that we can possibly see, just like we always did when I was a kid. So they saw all kinds of national parks. They visited every attraction they could find. They had a wonderful trip until they got to Medford, Massachusetts. This is where her sister was renting a house. And this began another phase of her career, and I think the most interesting phase of her career. She began by tutoring foreign students at Harvard. She was an ESL teacher at Harvard. During their summer extension course, getting foreign students ready to go into courses. She enjoyed that. It was not very lucrative. She then became a nurse's aide, given her nursing background in a mental hospital. That didn't go over very well. And then she joined Dennison House. Dennison House was a community home, sort of like Hull's house in Chicago, which dealt with Americanizing recent immigrants, like a duck to water, okay? She loved this job. She worked with Irish, Polish, Syrian, and Chinese students and their families. She swept up girls and took them to their family home. She was a major advocate at this time of girls can do it, and if you'll notice the date, in 1926, girls were starting to do it. Okay? We had girls starting to do things. This was a wonderful life for her. Within a year, she became associate director of Denison House. Her life was moving along wonderfully. On the side, this is her main career, this is the main function of her life. She's doing good, she's helping lots of people, but she still is flying. Another person named Denison, no relationship to this institution, sets up an airport outside of Boston. She invests in it, she becomes involved with it, she is working to advocate more women coming into flying. And the next year, this is her social worker picture, everything changes in 1927, May of 1920, when Charles Lindbergh makes his transatlantic flight and becomes the most popular man in the United States. My mother talks of this fondly. She was 12 when Lindbergh made his flight, and talked about Lindbergh being the superstar of superstars. Everywhere, every magazine you picked up, everywhere you went, Lindbergh, 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 Lindbergh. The country was crazy about flying, crazed. If I have anything extra to do, I've got to learn to be a pilot. And this set up among very, very wealthy women, and I love this, two women. One is Amy Guest, who comes from an old New York family, sort of like a Rockefeller or a Roosevelt. She is married to a peer of the British Parliament. She's quite wealthy. She is an amateur pilot. Versus Mabel Bold, daughter of a saloon keeper, married to a South American billionaire, wearing on this hand, on her left hand, a 34-carat diamond. Crude and rude. And Amy Guest is appalled that the first woman pilot to cross the ocean would be the daughter of a saloon keeper. What would that say about American women? Well, Amy said, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it myself. And what does she do? Through her connection, she contacts Admiral Byrd, who has gone on major expeditions. She buys his plane, the Friendship, and then her family steps in. Her daughter is going to be presented to court. Mom, I don't want you flying a plane. It's unladylike. It will ruin my chances for a good marriage. I'm being presented at court. Please. You've heard this. You have children. You know we can't do anything right sometimes. But then, her son, who is a junior at Harvard, says, we're going into final exams, Mom. How can I possibly pass my courses if I'm afraid and worried about you dying by flying a plane across the Atlantic? Well, while she didn't listen to her daughter, she listened to her son and said, okay, I'm not going to do it. So Amy says, I have to find someone presentable to represent American women. I'm going on a search. Isn't this mythic? I'm searching for the princess, you know, the one that can feel the pea under the things, and not the carat diamond. I want a real lady. So the search goes on through Captain Hilton Rayleigh, who was commissioned by Amy Guest to find the proper person. And search, 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 search. We get to Boston, and whose name comes up? Amelia Earhart. Now, I'm not technologically proficient enough to go online and get her voice. But you can go online and listen to her voice. She has a wonderful voice. She has a, not quite as deep as Eleanor Roosevelt, but it's a rich, wonderful voice. She makes a great appearance. She's educated, she's good looking. I want you to look at something. She's billed as Lady Lindy. If you look at their faces, and I looked at lots and lots of photographs, they look as if they're related. You put them side by side, and there's a number of pictures side by side. She couldn't have a better face for this kind of advertisements. So she's approached, and she is wooed. And now in all good stories, there's a villain. Now, people will argue with me about this, but I think I've read enough to be able to label this man. If he's not a villain, he's a semi-villain, okay? G.P. Putnam, if you read the book, G.P. Let's talk a little bit about G.P. Very illustrious family. Grandpa is one of the great publishers in American history. He's done all the big boys, Hawthorne, Poe. You name all of our beginning American literature people, Putnam's has published them. By the time, you know how it is in a family, the first one makes the money, the second one spends the money, the third one loses the money. Okay, that's what happens here. G.P. Putnam is sold, company is sold to another house, and G.P. is sort of left on his own. Well, he is a very, very interesting guy. Handsome, 6'4", good looking, dresses well, been to the greatest schools. So what do you do when you come from a good family and the money's run out? You marry more. He courted and won the heiress to Crayola crayons. That's why I'm so glad Marta asked me for this assignment. These little tidbits are fascinating. I drive through Hershey all the time, see the sign for Crayola. It was like, who cares? Now I care. All right? Dorothy was a great wife. They had a beautiful estate in Rye. He works in New York. G.P. becomes the publicist, I think the first big publicist in a long line, for Lindbergh. Now, how hard is this to be a publicist for the most popular man in the United States? He's running with it. I'm having a great time. Money is pouring in as a publicist. But the marriage is not so good. The marriage is just unbelievable. He hires a tutor from Harvard because he went to Harvard, and obviously the best tutors come from Harvard. The Harvard tutor is 20 years old, and Dorothy, his wife, and the Harvard tutor become an item. Go figure. And he has not exactly been a good boy himself prior to this.
No.
So he is involved in this whole setup of, we're going to take this fascinating looking woman and we are going to make her a star. Well, this is how we're going to make her a star. She's going to be baggage in this plane. She isn't going to touch a wheel. She isn't going to do anything except sit in the plane and fly overseas with the pilot, Bill Stoltz, and the mechanic, Louis Slim Gordon. So, in 1928, they fly across the Atlantic. When she lands and the reporters come out, she makes, I think, the last real statement in her life, or the remaining part of her life. She said, "I had nothing to do with this. I was just a sack of potatoes." I don't think publicists like those kinds of statements. That doesn't work very well. Well, as soon as she landed, the guys were forgotten. I mean, the guys were just like, they didn't even get picked up from the airport. It's really, really sad. She is swept up by the upper echelons of British society. She is feted. She dances with the Prince of Wales. She is taken to beautiful home after beautiful home. It's Princess Land has come true. I mean, and it's like, okay, I'm enjoying this. I am totally enjoying this. And at this point, G.P. Putnam steps in England, and takes control. Come into my web, said the spider to the fly. And for the next 10 years, from this point on, he is really sort of dictating almost every move she makes. The pictures change. The pictures that we see prior to 1929 are very natural. It's her in a snapshot you would take in your yard. The pictures after 29 are these. She is now a commodity. Her poses, her styling is like a Hollywood actress of the 1930s. He travels with her, and he says to her, you know, we need to write a book. And I think the best place for you is to come and live in my home while you write a book. So she moves into Putnam's home. Dorothy's having the affair with a tutor here. G.P. is squiring Amelia around. Amelia and Dorothy become fast friends. They're like this. They're absolutely, it's an amazing relationship. And when she writes her book, 20 hours, 40 minutes, who's it dedicated to? Dorothy Putnam. Whoa, okay. However, Dorothy starts to get the idea that something is going on and files for divorce. This leaves G.P. free to start marketing his commodity. And from 1929 to 1937, which is the legendary part of the story, we see her made into a legend. She becomes a legend. And the reason she does that is she starts to advocate for women, and I think this part has been a part of her life all the way through. I attribute this to her mom and her grandmother, and the fact that these women had to work together as a family unit with the father out. She forms federations of women's pilots. In 1929, she forms the Powder Puff Derby, which is a group of women. Now, I don't mean to be sexist about this, but I want you to look at the picture, and I think from the picture you can understand why she flew to the top in terms of popularity. I think the picture says 1,000 words. By far the most stylish. She's a beautiful woman, and she makes things happen. These women have been flying for much longer than she has, but she's the one that brings the group together. She's the one who organizes. She's the one who starts to advocate for women. She goes on a speaking tour and starts writing magazine articles that women can do anything they want to do. Now, the last speaker, who had a feminist interpretation, really spent a lot of time on that, which I will not spend a lot of time on. But if we look what she does from this point on, with GP at the background, and I want you to read something which I found very interesting. When I went up to my cousin's home in Nowant, Connecticut, which is next to Mystic, one of the people who was at the Thanksgiving dinner said, I told him what I was doing, and he said, well, she was married in my mother's house. And I said, what? She was married in my mother's house. He asked her to marry her, and she put him off and put him off and put him off. And I'll get something for you that I think you'll find is very interesting. Now, of course, can you find it, Gerry? Yes, I can find it. This is the letter. Love this. So prophetic. This is the letter that she wrote to her husband the week before they were married in Nowak at his mom's house. Dear George, you must know again my reluctancy to marry, my feeling that I shatter thereby chances in work which means so much to me. In our life together, I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you similarly. I may have to keep some pace where I can go to be myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all times the confinements of even an attractive cage. I must extract a cool promise, and that is you will let me go in a year if we find no happiness together. Wow. Wow.
Quite a premarital thing.
Why premarital things? And you know, she saw what was going to happen to her, and she went along with it anyways. And to me, I think what this is a symbiotic relationship. She couldn't do what she wanted to do by herself, and that was to promote women and promote the advancement of women, but partnered up with this guy, and I use the word specifically, partnered up with this guy. It worked until, I think, the trip around the world, this is the Powder Puff, she won the Powder Puff Derby, by the way, 2 or 3 times. In 1929, she was invited, this is pre-marriage, she's invited to Hoover, and what does she talk to Hoover about, which I found marvelous? An equal rights amendment for women. Go, girl. This is the way to do it. Some of the other planes, she set an altitude record in this Beechnut Pitcairn plane. This is the first example of, it's a plane and a helicopter, it's a combo. But it's Beechnut Gum that sponsors this whole thing, and we get industry coming into the aviation industry and starting to put labels on things. She got lots of money this way to endorse products. Their wedding on February 7th in 1931. He is good looking, let's face it. I mean, he's got it. They make a good looking couple, certainly. She's in zillions, every ladies magazine that I went online in the 1930s has got an article by Amelia Earhart. It's about flying, it's about women doing what they want to do, it's about getting out there and being all you can be. She's hired by Purdue University to teach a course in women's studies. Women's studies in the 30s. Another positive point, and attracting all kinds of women at a college level to go and be who you want to be, girl. And then, I love this part, she's always beautifully dressed in every picture. In every picture, she might get out in a pilot's coat, but when she opens up that leather coat, there's something great under it. In 1934, she starts her own fashion house, sort of predates J-Lo in this. And I just like this picture. This was one of her sort of sportswear things. And I just, of all the pictures, this is the one that at least hit me. Lots of records. Lots and lots and lots of records. The first one, the highest altitude. The first woman to fly from Hawaii to the continent. The first woman to fly from the United States to Mexico. Lots and lots and lots of firsts. 1936, the year before it's all going to come to an end. Now, drunks in her life. Her dad, okay? the mechanic who flew her across flew her across to begin with, wicked alcoholic, just wicked alcoholic. And then her round the world trip, Morantz, Earhart, and Newman, and if you read I Am Amelia, that he is the other great character in that, wicked alcoholic. Wicked alcoholic. Now, personally, I don't get in a car with someone with drinking. I know I said probably 20 times a year to my students before every vacation, I don't care if it's your parents, if they're drinking, you don't get in a car with them. I certainly would never get into a plane with a drunk. But maybe because she was used to dealing with alcoholics and thought she could handle them, this is who she decides to go around the world with. And I'm not going to get into that. These programs certainly have covered this phase of her life. But I think if we go back to the arrow image that I started with, I know that in teaching in this town, the things that, and I've taught long enough, there's one thing about being an old teacher. You can see what happens to your students. This town's students are infinitely successful because of the bows who have shot them. And that's the majority of you. And I've lived long enough to see that they have done very well in life. They've had a good, strong start. And now that I'm teaching in Bridgeport, the bow, there certainly are bows, but they don't have the ability to stretch and shoot as well as this family did with their daughter. She had enough stamina and strength given to her in the first decade of her life, which allowed her to get through the second decade of her life and survive, and then soar in the third decade of her life. I have one regret, and that's that she listened to her husband a little too much. Because if you get into the trip, which I don't have enough time to do, the trip was a publicity stunt. It was not well thought out. And someone asked me at the beginning, the question that I thought I was going to start out with, what happened to Amelia Earhart? That's a whole other search. It is like, I couldn't even begin because everybody disagrees with everybody else. But by far, the reason this woman, I think, resounds so strongly as she does 75 years after her death, for me, is about what a fabulous human being she was during her entire life, and what a great example she set for women in the United States. Just an amazing, amazing young woman, and I think we need to shift the emphasis a little bit from pilot to amazing human being. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry I went over. If you have any questions, I hope I can answer them. Yes?
I'm concerned about, was she well received in the newspapers? Did she receive criticism? Because at that time, she would have been very unusual for a woman. And I'd like to know, I understand she had a strong family, and she had certain teachers who promoted her, and her own self-confidence grew upon that. But did she receive in the media? Was she criticized?
I could not, she was not a media savvy person. She appears in newspaper articles for records that she sets up until her flight across to England, her transatlantic flight. Once she does that, I see very, very little criticism. There was some. Woman's Companion, a magazine, criticized her, basically said in a short article that she should think about having children and taking care of her husband. But that's one of the few I ran into. She became as popular as any of the film stars in the 1930s. And I think he did such a great job of publicity. She did a lot of charity work. She did a lot of pro-women things, that she escaped criticism. Maybe I was looking at newsreels, the Path newsreels, there's a couple of clips of. Everything's positive. For some reason she just seems, I could not find. Maybe if I were going to write a book.
So there was no...
There's very little, but because she's unknown. She's basically an unknown entity until 1929.
But there was no religious rights?
No, you don't see that. She's very religious. She's devout. She goes to church. She's very active in the Lutheran Church. He's Episcopalian, a divorcing Episcopalian, but he's an Episcopalian. She continues to go to church she never stopped. So her faith is pretty intact. It's an anomaly, I think. But then again, she gets into this, right time, right place, Lady Lindy, there's very little, if you look at Lindbergh, there's very little anti-Lindbergh until years after, and you find out about his, neo-Nazi holdings and the fact that he had a second family. Nobody spread any, he's pretty positive until the start of World War II, but there's very little negative Lindbergh, and there's very little negative her. Yes?
How long did she live in Chicago?
2 years. 2 years. Yep.
I'm being an armchair psychologist, but don't you think the father was destroyed by there being
Absolutely.
10 months out of every year, year after year?
If I had a father-in-law like this, who was, first of all, incredibly honored in the state, okay, by numerous groups. He's the head of the Underground Railroad. He's a Supreme Court judge. He's wealthy as all get out, and he's the puppeteer. He doesn't allow me to get married until I make a certain amount of money. When I start losing my positions, it becomes, more. And then he controls me after the son of a gun dies. He leaves a will. He could help me. He leaves a will that traps me. If I drank, I'd be drinking. Yeah, I totally concur. I think the dad especially, Grandma was a little looser, but Dad was not. Grandpa was unmerciful to him. Very good, and he was a great dad. The girls, no matter what happened, the girls up till the end supported him. Even when he divorced their mother and remarried, the girls sent him money. Amelia bought him a home. They were devoted to him. He was a wonderful father. They adored him. And until he started drinking, he was the light of their lives. The mom didn't go out and play with them in the yard. Dad did. Dad took him places. Dad took him on trips with the Pullman car. But he was a vital force. But I think he was crushed. And then, boozing is not the answer, but what are you going to do? Yes.
I have heard, and don't know anything about it, you do probably, if there was any death wish in her misdirected flight.
She wrote the first time she went up in a plane by herself, she invited her parents to the airport. She didn't tell them what was going to happen. And she wrote each of them sort of a goodbye letter, which would be, I may die, I'm sorry if I caused you any hardship as a result of this. She was always aware, and there's a good reason for her always being aware, of the women who tried to cross either the English Channel or cross the Atlantic. 3/4 of them died. The death toll was enormous in the time period prior to the 1929 crossing. It was very, very, very dangerous. And she periodically wrote these notes, but I also want you to read you. I wasn't going to do this, but it's an appropriate question. A poem that I really, really liked, that she wrote when she was at, just before she was asked to go overseas. She wrote this while she was still working at at Denison. It's called Courage. Courage is the price that life exacts for granting peace. That soul knows it not, knows no release from little things, knows not the livid loneliness of fear, nor mountain heights where bitter joy can hear the sound of wings, nor can life grant us boon of living, compensate for dull gray ugliness and pregnant hate, unless we dare the soul's dominion. Each time we make a choice, we pay with courage to behold the resistless day and count it fair. So I think certainly she's really aware of death, but then again, it's like, if I don't do it, how am I going to know? And it's that attitude of doing and experiencing. And that she absolutely gets from her grandparents and her mom's family. It's do in order to learn. Do it, do it, do it.
So no negative psychological thing that would imply that she wished to let herself go.
I've read that in 2 or 3 books. The majority of books don't agree. This is only personal. I don't see that. I think she clearly recognizes, except for the last trip, that there are problems. She takes, when she sees a danger, she took more lessons. She changed planes. She changed planes like some people change cars. I mean, she went through a lot of planes. If she found a plane that she thought was better, she would trade in and trade up or trade across and do a lot of that for safety reasons. So I don't see a death wish, although certainly the book, I Am Amelia Earhart certainly gives that interpretation, but that's the right of the author to interpret.
Thank you.
Okay.
Based upon your research and your study of this remarkable person, what is your reaction to this rather, I'll say, weird book that is now the subject of all the discussion?
Well, Marta, this is great. Marta gave me the book to read in October, and I read it in a day, and then did I call you or email you? We talked at any rate, and I said, Marta, I don't like the book. I don't like the book. And I didn't like the book, okay? So, meanwhile, I'm starting to read all this other stuff. Then I see Marta again, and I have to give her credit for this. I said, I found it a really strange book. And Marta said to me, read it like a poem. So, okay, it's a prose epic poem. I read it as a poem, and I love it. I love it. It's not a novel. It's a poem. It's a poem about flying. You move from first to third person. I mean, it is, heights and depths. She's in touch. She's an author. She's entitled to do this. And at least it set off this wonderful discussion that we've been having through the whole series. And I'll be honest with you, I knew this much about Amelia Earhart. I learned it in 5th grade. I never would have picked up a book on Amelia Earhart unless we had Westport Reads. I am so grateful to this library for this search because I love it. This has been wonderful. So, I could see where you're coming from in terms of the book because, it's quick count. Did some people not like it? I mean, a few, right? Be honest. It wasn't my best read ever. But as a poem, I love it as a poem. I mean, I taught the Odyssey for God knows how many years. This works for me. Okay? I can see it. I think she's a little heavy on GP in here. I mean, he wasn't that bad.
They would have had to carry no gasoline to carry the amount of booze he had in that airplane.
Well, that's my big bit. I don't drive with drunks. Never have, never will. Except I take that back. I was once a drunk who drove, but that was college. Not from that point. Yes. Yes.
Okay. I think you're hard on GP because I think they definitely needed and complemented one another. He gave her the wherewithal in order to do everything that she wanted.
I just don't think that she had, I will agree with you, it's a symbiotic relationship. I think she needed a bigger cage. And he definitely, if you look at the notes, the sad thing is they're home burned and all of her personal papers, her diaries, her poems, the short stories she wrote burned with the house. So the only stuff we have is with what was with the relatives, but we do have his appointment books. Boy, he kept her on a steady schedule. Now maybe I wasn't at home, I don't know what went on, but he planned, he kept her moving all the time. She was constantly on the road. It's like an authoress who, has to do bookstores. Oh, what a schedule. Very little time together. But, it worked for both of them. It worked for him, it worked for her. She didn't walk out, he didn't walk out.
It was also the Depression. She was lucky she had a schedule.
She's very lucky. And, they had money. I mean, she was back. I don't think money ever mattered to her. I don't see anything about money except for the planes. I need money to get a plane. She certainly didn't cover herself in jewelry. She was not interested in homes. She bought things for other people. Her sister had a bad marriage. She took care of her sister. She took care of her nephews and nieces. She took care of a lot of people. There's no ostentation on her part. She kept that car, the yellow thing, forever. I mean, it's like me. I never get rid of cars, but for sentimental reasons. Yes. And then I think we'll wind it
Last
up.
question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's by now, I can't remember if it was in one of the movies or in the book, but somewhere I thought G.P. Putnam, before money, refused to put the signal on the island. He said, no, that's too expensive. Does anybody else remember that?
It was in this book.
It was in this book.
It was in this
I have that the signal failed from mine, but it was there, but it failed.
Okay.
It wasn't that it wasn't put in place, but it didn't work, and that's why they were off course. But I've got to tell you, and I believe the previous speaker said this, if you try to answer the question, what happened to Amelia Earhart, you will drive yourself absolutely out of your mind. Because every single, first of all, the online, when you Google it, oh my God, it's like 75 pages. And the theories are like, captured by aliens. So if you want to go there, that's a whole other search, but I'm not going there.
Yeah.
But it's just somebody said an industry unto itself. So unfortunately she died, but the life she led, it was a fabulous life. And a fabulous example for women and just a wonderful human being. Just a great girl. Woman.
Didn't go in her